Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a simple visualization. Just picture a plant.
Okay.
Let's say it's a big, healthy fruit tree. When you look at it, what's the first thing you notice?
The fruit, probably, the
Hmm.
flowers, the leaves.
Exactly. The stuff that grabs your eye. The results.
Naturally, it's the part we enjoy, the part we can actually use, so it makes sense that's where we focus.
Right. But here's the metaphor for our whole discussion today. We almost never think about the roots. We definitely don't analyze the soil, the nutrient balance, all the stuff that made the fruit possible in the first place.
We just want to pick the fruit and walk away.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous way to approach anything, really. But it's fatal when you're talking about history or theology. If you
Yeah.
ignore the root system, the plant eventually dies.
And if you don't understand the soil, the environment,
You can't grow anything to begin with.
and that brings us right to our topic. We're looking at maybe the most pivotal planting moment in Western history. We're unpacking the Apostle Paul's first missionary journey. Now, looking at my notes here, I see Roman history, geography, some pretty dense theology. Is this just a travel log?
Oh, far from it. We're looking at the moment a small, localized Jewish sect started to become a global faith, a faith that would eventually swallow the Roman Empire.
Wow.
So we aren't just tracing a map, we are digging into the roots and the soil of that whole transition. We want to uncover the strategy behind his travels and, honestly, a definition of salvation that's wildly different from what most people think it is.
Okay, let's start with the man himself, Paul. The source material often calls him the founder of Christianity. Now, that sounds wrong to a lot of people. They'd say, wait, wasn't Jesus the founder? Are we giving Paul too much credit?
It's a provocative title, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But historically, it really holds water. I mean, think of it this way. Jesus provided the life, the teaching, the sacrifice. But during his lifetime, the movement was almost entirely contained within ethnic Judaism.
It was a Jewish movement.
Completely. Without Paul's specific theology of the Gentile mission, his understanding of that root, Christianity could have just stayed a small subsect of Judaism forever.
So if Jesus is the architect,
Hmm.
Paul's the general contractor who actually builds the thing.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. The entire structure of Western civilization was, in many ways, built on the trajectory that Paul set. He literally changed the course of world history.
But to understand how, we have to go back to your farming metaphor.
We have to. The soil analysis.
Right.
A master farmer doesn't just, throw seeds around and hope for the best. They test the soil. They check the climate, the acidity. They analyze the whole environment.
To make sure the roots can take hold.
Exactly. And Paul did the same thing. He wasn't just wandering around preaching. He analyzed the historical soil of the Roman Empire to see where the gospel could actually take root and survive.
That suggests a level of strategy most people miss.
Yeah.
We picture these biblical figures as just, going where the spirit blows. Very mystical, maybe a little random.
No. There was a map, and there was a calculated plan.
Let's talk about the starting point then. The journey starts in Antioch. But I'm looking at the map in our notes, and I see Syrian Antioch, Pisidian Antioch. Why so many Antiochs?
Branding. It's pure imperial branding.
Branding.
Yeah. You have to remember the history. After Alexander the Great died, his empire was split up. One of the big dynasties that came out of that was the Seleucid Empire.
The Seleucids,
Yeah.
okay? And they were based where?
All over the Near East. The founder, Seleucus I, named a bunch of cities after his father, Antiochus. It's like having a dozen cities named Washington in the U.S. It was a way to mark your territory.
Got it.
But the one Paul starts from, Syrian Antioch, was a beast. It was the third largest city in the entire Roman Empire, right after Rome and Alexandria.
Oh, we're not talking about some dusty village.
Not even close. It was a huge cosmopolitan hub. Trade, culture, vice, everything was there. It was the perfect laboratory for a global faith because the whole world was already there. That's the launch pad.
Okay, so walk us through the route. They leave this massive city. Where to next?
They sail from the port near Antioch over to Cyprus. Now, that's interesting because Cyprus was Barnabas's home turf.
Barnabas was his partner on this trip.
Right. So it's a smart move start where you have a local guide. They cross the island and they sail north to the coast of modern-day Turkey to a place called Perga.
And this is where the terrain gets difficult, right?
Drastically. From Perga, they have to go up through the Taurus Mountains to get to the Anatolian Plateau.
That sounds rough.
I need to stress this. This is not a weekend hike. Those mountain passes were notorious. They were steep, prone to flash floods, and crawling with bandits. When Paul later writes about being in danger from robbers, he's probably talking about this exact climb.
So why go that way? Why not just stick to the coast where it's safer?
Because the prize wasn't on the coast. The prize was the infrastructure.
It's infrastructure.
Paul was using the Roman highway system, specifically a road called the Via Sebaste. The Romans built these incredible roads to move their legions, but Paul saw them as arteries for the gospel. He climbed those mountains to hit Pisidian, Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, because they were key hubs on the main trade route.
A hub and spoke model.
Precisely. You capture the city, the hub and the influence just naturally radiates out to all the surrounding villages. But there's something deeper going on here than just good logistics. It's about his mindset.
What do you mean?
When you look at the great figures in the Bible, Moses, the prophets, and definitely Paul, when the Spirit moves them, they stop thinking locally, they start thinking cosmically.
Cosmically. That sounds a little sci-fi.
It's not. It's a theological reality. Moses didn't just want to free a tribe of slaves. He wanted to create a holy nation to show the whole world a new way to live. Paul had that same worldview.
He saw the bigger picture.
He looked at the Roman Empire, this huge oppressive machine, and he didn't see an enemy to hide from. He saw a grid. He saw a network that could be filled with something new. He wasn't just planting a church. He was trying to execute a global takeover of the human heart.
That is a huge shift in how to view this. Which brings us to, well, the most explosive part of your notes. We need to talk about the message itself, because you've flagged a huge conflict in how we define salvation, and this might ruffle some feathers.
It might. But we have to be precise here, because this is where modern Western Christianity often gets it wrong. We have diluted the message.
Okay, lay it on me.
Yeah.
If I ask an average person what is salvation, they'll probably say, it means believing in Jesus so my soul goes to heaven when I die. You're saying that view is incomplete.
I'm saying that view, if it stops there, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the entire biblical story. It's what we call fruit picking.
The metaphor again?
Yes. Modern Christianity often acts like a fruit picker. We just want the result. Get me into heaven. Get me my fire insurance. We treat the gospel like a transaction.
But a farmer.
A farmer cares about the whole system, the soil, the root, the plant, and the fruit. To understand salvation, you have to go all the way back to Adam.
To the very beginning.
Exactly. Think about Genesis. Adam wasn't just, hanging out in Eden eating fruit. That's a child's reading of the text. Adam was God's agent, his manager of creation. The command was to fill the earth and subdue it. That means to cultivate it, to extend the order of Eden to the whole world.
So the fall wasn't just about breaking a rule. It was losing your job.
It was a loss of function, a loss of purpose. Humanity stopped being the caretakers of creation and became its exploiters. We started destroying the soil, both the literal earth and our societies.
So if that's the problem, a broken system, what's the solution? What is salvation then?
Salvation is the restoration of the order of creation. It is not about evacuating souls out of a dying world. It's about God moving into the world to fix it. It is about restoring the cosmos.
Cosmos, that's a huge word.
It's the biblical word. Look at Mark 16.15. In a lot of our translations, it says, preach the gospel to all creation. The Greek word there is cosmos, not just people. Cosmos, the entire created order, the birds, the trees, the systems of justice, all of it.
So Paul's message wasn't just believe this so you can leave. It was believe this so we can fix this.
Yes. And you cannot fix the plant if the soil is toxic. If our societies, our environment, our systems of justice are ruined, humanity can't thrive. The gospel must speak to those things. It has to.
Yeah.
If your version of salvation doesn't care about the world you actually live in, it is not the salvation Paul was preaching.
That's heavy. And it sounds like a direct challenge to that ticket to heaven idea. It sounds like work.
It is work. That is the point. We are called to be co-laborers in restoring God's world. Paul was calling people to become farmers again.
This changes everything about his journey. He wasn't just saving individuals. He was planting outposts of a new world.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the map. He gets to these cities, Pisidian, Antioch, Iconium. He drops this huge cosmic message. How did it go over?
The reaction was split right down the middle. It was volatile. You have to picture it. Paul walks into a synagogue. He's a guest speaker. He introduces himself as Saul of Jerusalem, student of Gamaliel.
And Gamaliel was, who, for our listeners...
Gamaliel was like the top legal mind of the Jewish world, a Pharisee of the highest order. So by dropping that name, Paul establishes instant intellectual authority.
Hello, listening.
You're listening. But then he drops the bombshell. that all of Israel's history was pointing to this Messiah, Jesus, and here's the kicker, that this restoration is open to the Gentiles without them having to become Jewish first.
And the synagogue leadership did not like that.
They hated it. It threatened their entire power structure. But you know who loved it? The God-fearing Greeks.
Who were they exactly?
They were Gentiles, Romans, Greeks, who were attracted to the ethics and monotheism of Judaism. They were sick of their own chaotic, immoral gods. But they couldn't get on board with the strict dietary laws, circumcision, the cultural isolation. They were on the outside looking in.
And Paul basically says, the door's open, come on in.
He tore the door off the hinges. He told them, you don't have to become culturally Jewish to be part of God's family. And they went wild for it. The text says in Pisidian Antioch, almost the whole city showed up to hear him the next week.
So you have the religious insiders angry and the outsiders thrilled. That sounds like a recipe for a riot.
And that's exactly what they got. Paul was run out of town, chased out of cities. In Lystra, it got really violent. They stoned him and dragged him out of the city, literally leaving him for dead.
Stoning wasn't just throwing a few rocks. That was an execution.
It was brutal mob violence. He survived, miraculously, but he carried the scars of that soil analysis for the rest of his life. But here's the key. When they got kicked out of the synagogue, they didn't just go home. They formed a new community, an ecclesia, a church.
So the fruit was growing, but then trouble comes from the inside. We have to talk about these Judaizers.
This is the sabotage of the root system. After Paul finishes his journey and heads back to his home base, a new group shows up in Galatia. They were Jewish Christians, but they insisted that everyone had to follow the Mosaic law.
They followed him.
They trailed him, yeah. Imagine being a new believer. Paul leaves, and then these guys from Jerusalem show up and say, that Paul guy, he gave you the lay version. He's not a real apostle. To be really saved, you have to get circumcised, follow the food laws, all of it.
They were trying to put the genie back in the bottle.
Exactly. They were turning a gospel of grace back into a system of rules. They were essentially saying God's restoration is only for one cultural group.
And Paul's reaction when he heard this?
He was furious. That's why his letter to the Galatians is so intense. He just starts yelling from the first paragraph. He knew if their view won, the whole global mission would collapse. So he wrote Galatians, his first letter, as a counterattack to defend the true root of the gospel, faith, not ritual.
It was a fight for the very soul of the movement.
It was. Now, this brings up a good point about authority. Paul's out there fighting, starting churches, writing angry letters. Did he just go rogue? Was he a lone wolf?
It kind of sounds like it.
It does, but the answer is a definite no. Paul deeply respected order.
How can you say that?
Look at his actions. After the journey, he returns to his sending church in Syrian Antioch to report back. He was accountable.
And he went to Jerusalem. Right, to the head office.
Correct. When this conflict boiled over, he didn't just start his own denomination. He went to Jerusalem to meet with Peter, James, and John, the big guys. It's called the Jerusalem Council.
And his goal there was what?
To get their official recognition. He needed them to agree that the Spirit was moving among the Gentiles without the law. He fought for unity. He wasn't a lone wolf. He was building a unified global structure.
And they agreed?
They did. They recognized his mission. The core victory was won. You do not need to become culturally Jewish to be part of God's kingdom.
Wow. That meeting goes differently.
Yeah.
And history is completely different.
We might not be having this conversation. The Western world would look unrecognizable.
So let's wrap this all up. We've looked at the soil, the Roman Empire, the roads. We've looked at the roots, this theology of a restored cosmos, not just a ticket to heaven. Paul wasn't just a traveler. He was a strategic architect.
He was a man with a vision of a healed world. He really believed God wasn't just saving souls from the earth, but saving the earth through renewed human beings.
It really challenges how we think about mission. It's not just about numbers. It's about transforming the landscape.
Exactly. And that leads to the final question I want to leave everyone with today. We talked about the farmer versus the fruit picker. The fruit picker wants the reward without the work. The farmer gets their hands dirty, cultivating the ground so life can flourish.
So the question is?
The question is this. If salvation is truly about restoring the world's order, not just escaping it, are you living your life as a farmer, actively cultivating goodness and justice and order in the world around you? Or are you just a fruit picker, standing around waiting for your ticket out? Because according to Paul, we were saved to work the soil.
A profound question to end on. Are you a farmer or a fruit picker? Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
Thank you. Keep digging.